She's the director. Morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So, used to be, I always had to tell a story before I start preaching. So this morning I'm going to tell you a story. I don't know if some of you might have heard this story, but it's about two little boys. We'll use the name Danny and Mitch. How about it? So Danny, he goes to this church, and he goes out and he invites Mitch. Mitch had never been to church before. Well, Danny is pastor's kid. So he goes, "What, Danny? I'm not." Danny could be anybody. So Danny, he's pastor's kid, so he knows what's going on in church, and you get through the church, and Mitch, he's like super excited. They get up, and they start singing songs, and Mitch says, "What are they doing? What are they doing? What's that for? What's that for?" And so Danny has to explain to him, and then some lady gets excited and starts waving her hanky and running around the church. What's she doing? Mitch is all excited. What in the world? And then the pastor gets up and he opens his Bible, and Mitch is like, "Danny, what's this about? What's going on? What's going on?" So Danny, he explains to it. Mitch is all excited. He says, the pastor gets up, opens his Bible, fixes his tie. Danny has to tell everything, he's doing that to be ready, and we're going to pray, and then the pastor gets up and he takes his watch off and he lays it on the thing there, and Mitch says, "Danny, what's that about? What's that for?" And Danny, being the good little preacher's son, said, "Absolutely nothing. It means absolutely nothing." See, I can't tell that joke when Brian's here because he might take it personal, but I can tell otherwise. All right, so this morning we want to continue just a little bit in Acts with evangelism. I tell you, Brian did an awesome job with the sermon series he did, and Danny building the foundation. It was an awesome explanation of the foundation of our church and the building blocks that built this church so many years ago, and continues to be the base that we're building here, even for this generation. So Brian left with evangelism as a pillar that builds up out of the church, and I think evangelism is so important. I know that this church understands ministry inside the church. It amazes me when a few years back, Mandy Burt come from Columbus down, and she had this idea of doing ministry. At the same time, we were doing the food pantry, and she wanted to do, what did she call it? Helping Hands, I think?
Yeah,
Helping Hands, and the church jumped behind her, and that ministry took off and welcomed her in, kind of as an outsider. But I think this church is really good at that. I think if somebody has an idea and wants to pursue a ministry, then this church gets behind them, backs them up. The evidence of the shoebox ministry that Chaz is leading, and Don, and just the awesome thing there that happens. We're really good at that. I think our challenge, and I know it is for me, is how we do evangelism. I agree with Brian that every ministry that we do here at Buchanan is evangelical in its meaning, but individually as Christians, I know I do, and I know a lot of us struggle with evangelism outside of the church. So I want to talk just a little bit about that, because I believe that true disciples of Christ, not only is it a calling for us to be evangelical, it also should be a desire, because of the good news that Christ has given us and the transformation that He's given us. We should want to share that with the people around us. Now, evangelism, missions, kind of the same thing. Our mission field maybe is just a little closer. And what we're going to talk about this morning is a couple of Paul's idea of how his missions went, how he went out into the world. But I want to look at that just a little bit in Acts. And I want to look for ways to strengthen us, ways to encourage us to want to go out and share the gospel with those around us. If we look in Acts, what I want to look at is we got up to the point in the church where the people were scattered, right? And they went out and they preached, and the church was enlarged because of that. They went out and what do you think they did? They went out and they set up a big tent, and they gathered a bunch of people and broke out the big speakers and the microphones. And listen, if you think about the history of where the church was at that time, that's not what happened. It wasn't like they went out and they got a big crowd together and preached to a big crowd. Now, some of them did. Peter went to the big Jewish buildings and stuff like that. But I'm telling you, when Paul went out, and most of his interactions were probably less than 12 people. Because if you think about it, you can't talk over more than half a dozen people without some way of projecting your voice and really having an amplifier to get your voice out there. So most of these interactions had to be small. They weren't in an auditorium like the big Western gym with the good acoustics and all that, so they could hear Maddie's little voice. I didn't get to hear it personally, but there was a lot of videos, Maddie, sorry. So that wasn't the way it was. Paul interacted with these people on a one-to-one level, 1 to 2, 1 to 3. Of course he had some opportunities where he had numerous people, but most of his interactions, most of his evangelism, his missionary trips, were going out and meeting and interacting with individual people. So that's what I want to look about a little bit today, is I want to look at Paul. We read about Paul and we see him as this awesome missionary. We see him as the first missionary, the first person that went out. But I would want to look more at Paul as a person, and that Paul was just a person. Paul was not anything special other than he was really good at what he did. When Paul had his conversion on the road to Damascus, he was the leader of a group of people that 100% believed in what they were doing. And we're going to read about that here in just a minute. He believed that what he was doing was right. He believed God had assigned him to do these jobs, because he believed that the priest, the people in authority, had that authority based on what God had given them. So he was a true believer of what he was doing, but yet he was just a man. So what I want to do is, in Acts 22, Phil, if we could just read, we're just going to read a little bit. We're going to look at Paul's conversion, and then we're going to look in a few other places. Aren't my flashcards pretty? They're all fancy colors. It's important when you can't see. I'm going to start reading that one just to give you an idea of what's going on here. It says, this is Paul speaking to a crowd, probably not a humongous crowd, but a crowd. And he's going to defend what his beliefs are. He's going to be defending to keep himself out of trouble. But by doing that, he's going to share the gospel. So here's what it says. It says, brothers and fathers, listen now to my defense. When they heard him speak to them in Aramaic, they became very quiet because he spoke in their language. Then Paul said, I am a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city under Gamaliel. I was thoroughly trained in the law of our fathers and was just as zealous for God as any of you are today. I persecuted the followers of this way to their death, arresting both men and women and throwing them into prison, as also the high priest and all the council can testify. I even obtained letters from them to their brothers in Damascus and went there to bring these people as prisoners to Jerusalem to be punished. Then he goes into his story. He's telling his testimony. He's not talking in in some great big facility. He's in a crowd. Some different places say maybe 25, maybe 50 people, probably less. And he's going to try to defend where he's at in his evangelism. Now, he's not going to stand up and say, I've done this, I've done that. I've been preaching to this many people, I've converted this many people. Listen to what he says. Listen to what his defense of his ministry is. He says, about noon, as I came near Damascus, suddenly a bright light from the heaven flashed around me. I fell to the ground and heard a voice say to me, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? Who are you, Lord? I asked. I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting, he replied. My companions saw the light, but they did not understand the voice of him who was speaking to me. What shall I do, Lord? I asked. Get up, the Lord said, and go to Damascus. There you will be told all that you have been assigned to do. His guidance, everything that he needs to know, is coming. That is his testimony. Listen, it says that he was blinded in the next few scriptures, and that kind of amazed me because Paul knew. He studied the Jewish laws. He studied the books of the Old Testament. He was very knowledgeable of Yahweh. He understood who God was. He knew everything there was and was as zealous as the people he was talking to about the Jewish belief. He was blinded by something that was, prior to Christ, a good thing. He was blinded by what he was doing and doing something that he truly believed in. See, sometimes if we look around us at the people that we interact with in our family and the people that we work with or anything like that, sometimes they're not blinded by just, bad things. Sometimes they're not blinded by horrible crimes and horrible moral issues and out doing horrible things. Sometimes they're blinded by good things. Paul was not blinded by desire of himself, which is what we're going to talk about here in a minute. But what I want to get at here is Paul was blinded by serving God. Do you understand that? He was blinded by being truly zealous for what he truly believed in. I would venture to say that before I came to Christ, if I had to stand up and give my testimony like this, and had to come up and defend my ministry, defend who I am today, that I could say I was blinded by self-desire, not a desire to do something good. As a kid, as a young man, I was blinded by the desire to make money, to have a good girlfriend, to have a nice car. Instead, I had an Escort 83, wonderful car. We cannot understand, how do I want to say this, how the people around us are blinded. So, in other words, let me say this. The challenges that face everybody else are not the same challenges that face you. Paul's challenges at that time were great. Paul's desire to serve his leaders was great. But listen, it's no more great than the desires of the people that you know that are lost. It's the same confused blindness is what I'm trying to get at. Just because we know this great story and we know Paul's history and how horrible the things that Paul done, doesn't mean that his blindness was any different than the people around us that are blind. Is that a little better understanding? What I want to get at this morning is Paul's missionary trips, all the great things Paul done, the power that he had to do all of that. I'm kind of skipping to the end here a little bit, but that's all right. Some of you look sleepy. The power that gave Paul his sight back. The power that took his sight in the first place. The power that gave him the desire that he had to make all these missionary trips, to be the evangelist that he was, is the same power that gave you and me sight when we chose to serve Christ. It's no different. Even though Paul, if you study Paul's history, he was very bold in what he did. He was probably a very good speaker. He obviously spoke more than one language. That's all awesome things, but all the power that was given to him on that Damascus road, when he received his sight, when he was called to go out and to speak the gospel, is the same power that we have today. So there's no reason we can't do the exact same thing. I kind of rounded that up real quick because, listen, whenever we start looking at evangelism around us, today, the people around us look really lost, don't they? Our country, you guys know I'm a pretty patriotic kind of guy. I love the history of our United States. I love looking at all that and reading about that. And I truly believe that we live in the greatest country on the earth. But we're in a mess right now. Things, I kind of made a list of all the different things that challenge us right now. And why the need for evangelism is so great. There's a scripture in Matthew 9 that we're pretty familiar with, 9:35. Phil, you don't have to go, I'll just read real quick. But it says, Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, and he's still saying this today to us, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into the harvest field. The harvest field today is no different. Even though we don't know exactly how it looked in Paul's time. But the challenges that faced Paul are still the challenges that face us today. The blindness is no different. And the power that Paul had to share, to be bold, and to go out into his communities is the same power that's available to us today. The reason the harvest, I think, is plentiful, and like I say, I wrote just a few of them down. I truly believe, I have family that's lost. I have family that know the truth, they know the gospel, but they have chosen not to serve God. And I know that their hope or their concern for the future has no hope. Why do I got to say things so confusing? Their concern for the future scares them. Because they don't know where the future is leading. Some of us are the same way. Listen, fear and anxiety are one of the biggest things that hold Christians back today. Well, that fear and anxiety that we still experience as children of God, think how much more the lost, how it affects them because they have no hope. Listen, the harvest, the fields are full. we need to be out there spreading the gospel to this harvest that is plentiful. Listen, the people in our community today, when I come home from work, I come down 23 through Waverly, and recently they're doing some work down on my property on Pleasant Hill. So I've been coming down Pleasant Hill, coming by Beep's house and looking. Used to be when I come down that road, there would be people outside, working in their yards, trying to make their houses look good, out interacting with neighbors. Just there's a different atmosphere today than there was 20 years ago when you look down these roads and look at the people of our community. There is people. I mean, I'm trying to say this without just coming right out and saying that there are some people out there that are really lost right now. The people that are addicted to several different things. And listen, I'm not putting addiction down because we all have an addiction of some kind. But there are people that are addicted to things that fulfill a desire in their life that can never be fulfilled. There are people that, and I'm not just talking about drugs, alcohol, all of this. I'm talking about all of the desires that can be fulfilled today by the humongous amount of communication that we can have, the internet, all this stuff that we have today. There are so many things that can fulfill the desires of people today that it makes their blindness just as dark as it did when Paul was killing Christians. Do you get that? Even though they're probably not hurting other people as bad as Paul did, their blindness is just as black. Their path in their life is just as dark. They are just as lost today, even with all of the stuff that the church is doing today. All of the good stuff. Listen, I'm not a fan of Facebook, but I came to the realization a long time ago that right now it is an awesome outreach for churches. I think people should go to church on Sunday morning, but today, if you don't feel comfortable going to church, you can turn your computer on and you can watch church from 50 different churches. 5 of them here in Pike County, which is unbelievable. You can even watch church from big old Bourneville Christian Union Church. You can see Pastor Miller preach his sermon on the computer. That is unbelievable. I didn't know they had a telephone in Bourneville. I hope he watches this. It's amazing the information that can be out there, but guess what? People are just as lost. Even with all that good news out there. They are just as blind today as they was then. Some of the things that I listed, the reason why the harvest is great, fear, no hope. Here's one. This one kind of hits home a little bit. Idols have fallen. Listen, how many people that you know that look up to or have an idol that's a movie star or, something like that? I mean, I'll admit, I used to be, still am a huge Tiger Woods fan. Not because he was Christian. I didn't look up to him because he was Christian. I looked up to him because I really liked to watch him play golf. Tiger was up here. Guess what happened? Twice now. Literally wrecked a car, and then before that, lightning. Bad. But look at how many figures in people's lives that they looked up to not only for spiritual guidance, but for other things, and that idol has fallen today. And we see that now more and more because it's all over the computer. That one kind of was interesting to me. I never thought about, how that could affect somebody. But if you've got a pastor or a church person that you look up to, and that person makes a mistake and falls, and it's big time on TV, and it's big news, and it's in all the papers, a lot of people, that puts their blinders on even thicker. The other ones I have that I can't see, they have chosen, and this is for the mess that drugs have created in our communities. They have chosen self-edification over everything else. I personally do not know what it is to have that unending desire to alter your mind, to get rid of all the thoughts in your mind and to think about nothing. I don't even know what that feels like, other than, when I had my heart attack, they shot me up with morphine, and I understood what that felt like. There was no more pain. And that was a good thing. But to want to do that because you're in so much pain, and because the lack of hope and the lack of not knowing your future and the fear and anxiety is so strong that all you want to do is pop a pill or smoke something to wipe out your mind. I don't understand that, but I'm telling you, it's a real thing for people today. They're trying to fill that hole in their life with something that cannot fill the hole. It's tough, but it's no darker. The blindness is no worse than it was in Paul's time. It's no different. So, I got to move on. Today we need to realize how great the harvest is needed. We've got to realize that it is our job to do it. We've got to understand. I want to wrap up with this, I think. I've got too many notes here. I want us to understand that just like Paul, you think Paul did all of this alone? Two things that Paul always had. 95% of the time, if you read his missionaries, he had a partner. He had somebody backing him up. He had somebody there. Now, you don't hear a lot about that person, in Paul's ear saying, hey, I think we should do it this way. No, that person, I think, truly believed that Paul was following what God had called him to do. And if you have somebody in your ear trying to doubt your calling, I think that's the wrong person in your ear. That's just my opinion. The person that God will send you is not there to hold you back. The person that God will send you to go with you on your mission is there to hold you up, to catch you when you stumble. Some of us, that's going to be our job. I truly believe that we are all called to the missionary field. I think we all have to be evangelists. But listen, that part of your job might be the Barnabas, the backup, the Barnabas, the Timothy, all the different backups that Paul had and that Peter had. We got to be willing to understand what our calling is. And listen, I have I have a bunch of notes on that, but I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time because I want to get to this. Romans 1, 16, 17 says, Phil, can you bring it up? I just have part of it written down.
16 what?
16 and 17. Romans 1. Sorry, I flipped there real quick.
There you go.
For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because the gospel, it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. Paul was not alone in the fact that he always had somebody with him, but he was also never alone because he had God with him. He had the Holy Spirit in his life. How do we know that? All of the evidence that the Bible talks about of when you received the Holy Spirit was manifested in his life. Now, I don't know that he did them all. I don't know that there's a story about him picking up snakes or any of that, but it was manifested in his life by the fact that he was bold and that he preached and that he shared his testimony that we just read. But listen, it wasn't his power. The power to get somebody saved, the power to intervene in the mess that our community is, the power that we need to overcome the horrible influence that drugs has on the lives of those around us, the power that we need to influence and show people that their future can be written in stone, that there is hope for their future, that there is life after death, that there is the promise that one day of all this pain that we have today will be gone. That power did not come from Paul. That power did not come from Paul's partner. It didn't come from his awesome ability to speak. It didn't come from his desire to overcome all the troubles and to go to Rome and Corinth and all these different places that he went. It came from God. The same power that's still available to us for us to evangelize. Listen, I could go into several different scriptures about why we should be evangelizing, but I truly believe that everybody in this church right now knows that it's our job to evangelize. It's our job to go out and to show the world that there is a cure for their blindness. You know, Brian, he makes it pretty simple. He says, your testimony is what? I was once blind and now I see. But listen, your story, just like Paul's story. Paul had a miraculous story, right? Jesus actually spoke to him and said, why do you persecute me? You know, it tells him what to do. Sends him to this town. Do you don't think that Paul could have stood up and said, man, I must have took a big bump on the head because I just heard somebody talking to me? No. It wasn't his power that made him do everything he did. It was the power of God strengthening him that allowed him to do everything that he did. We have that same power available to us. Listen, there's a field that I want to talk about real quick. A ministry field. A harvest field. A field that is plentiful. It's also a field that we have access to. And listen, right now I'm preaching to Rick Perkins. Because I have just as big of this field as the rest of it. And that's our family. I read an article. I want to read some of this to you real quick. It was a survey taken by, who took it? Yeah, that's who did it. I didn't put it on there. The survey by a group at a college. They took 1,000 new converts that went to their local churches. They went to their individual churches. They talked to new converts. And they asked him like 10 questions. The main question was, why did you choose to come to this church and accept Christ? And they had a list of, 5 different answers. What do you think the number one answer was? I'll tell you what wasn't number one. I saw it on Facebook. Wasn't number one. I seen a pretty sign out in front of the church. That wasn't number one. What was some of the other ones? I got something in the mail. That wasn't number one. And all these other things got like 5% of the answer. 79% of these people, you know what they answered? My family invited me. I never imagined. Now they were looking at why people went to church, but all of these people were new converts. Because they were invited to church, they heard the message. They probably heard somebody's testimony. They seen that there were other people that claimed to be Christians, that were Christians, that were still struggling with some of the stuff they were struggling with. Whatever it was that they saw at that church, they heard the gospel and they were saved. By being invited by a family member. I've probably said myself from the pulpit, it's not about inviting people to church, it's about sharing the gospel. Listen, sometimes it's all about inviting somebody to church. Because sometimes that's all we got. Sometimes, as soon as you start saying, man, I was blind, and then miraculously I could see, they're like, yeah, right. I got a brother that's so much smarter than me. Matter of fact, I think he's smarter than most of you. Makes what you think. Pretty smart, isn't he? And he's just as blind as anyone I know. And if I would go up to him and I would say, Paul, let me tell you about this miraculous transformation that happened in my life. Did I say Paul? I was talking about Paul in the Bible. Sorry. If I would have mentioned to my brother that I had this awesome transformation, he would start to tell me about everything that I'm doing wrong now. But if I invite him to a hot dog or a arena roast or whatever we do, then maybe something will sink in. I know that's simple. I know that's going back old school. I know. But listen, we got to do something. The harvest is ripe. It's ready. People are looking for something. They're looking for hope in something. We have the answer for that something. We have it in the form of, we're not going to hand it to them in a package. We have it to a form that we can say, hey, listen to how I was blind and now I see. Hey, come to church. Let me show you this guy that was blind and now I can see. Come to church. Let me show you some young men and young women that were blind but can now see. That's what evangelism means. And like Danny said, I have a challenge for you. I know that you guys have been watching The Chosen. I haven't been able to be here much. But tonight, you've been chosen to do something else. That was supposed to be funny, but it wasn't very funny. You've been chosen to be challenged to go talk to a family member. If you can invite them to church, invite them to church. Tell them that next Sunday we brought in an awesome speaker just for them. So you got to come and hear this kid. He is the next Billy Graham. And he's going to be preaching at the big Buchanan church. Is it all right if we build you up like that, Tyler? Maybe we won't say Billy Graham, but we'll say something good. Listen, Tyler's going to preach next Sunday morning. He was a little worried about being Mother's Day, but that's all right. Maybe he can invite his mother. However it works out. Your challenge tonight is in some way or form, talk to somebody lost in your family. If you don't have somebody lost in your family you can get a hold of, give me a call. I've got plenty. I'll give you a phone number. Listen, the only way that we're going to see God's church grow, including here at Buchanan, is if we reach out to the lost in our community. Reach out to the lost that we can affect. Paul's goal, what Paul was called to do, because of his history with the Jews, he really couldn't do a lot with them because they were after him pretty hard. So what God do? God sent him to the Gentiles. Said, hey, go speak to these people. They're going to listen to you. That's what God's going to do for you. He's going to say, hey, go speak to this sister or this brother, or this niece, this nephew, this cousin, whatever it is. He's going to say, go speak to them. I've opened that door. Just like he opened all those doors for Paul, he's going to open that door for you. And the best part is, that's not what's going to get them saved. God's going to do that part. You just need to do your part and tell them how God changed your life. Obviously, they're looking for something because they've got big holes in their lives. Did Paul know he was looking for something? No, he thought he had it all figured out, didn't he? He was doing what he thought was supposed to be doing. There's going to be people like that too. But when you show them what you've got, how you have the promise of eternal life, then they're going to know that they've got a hole in their life. There's so much awesome information that can help you in this book. And listen, I'm 100% a Bible guy, but there's also a whole lot of other books out there with awesome information on how you can evangelize. And as long as you remember that the people today are just as blind as the people that Paul had to deal with, and the power that you need to speak to those people today is the same power that Paul got, then we shouldn't fear, right? We shouldn't be afraid. He's going to give us the boldness we need. He's going to give you a big mouth. He's going to give you a story. Everything you need. You just need to be willing to say, Lord, who is it? Right? And when God says, hey, it's me, you need to go do this, be ready. Because that's what we're going to have to do. Stand with me, Will, with you and bow your heads.